Miss Mustard Seeds milk paint, and I'm going to create a really cool, authentic, chippy and crackled look. Now you might notice that I already started on this piece and I have one of the drawers done. So what I'm basically going to do is show you how I achieved this finish using a variety of techniques. You can tell I'm working outside, and I'm doing that with a purpose. I'm located in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and today it's beautiful and it's sunny and it's really warm. So I'm going to actually let the sun help me, and I'm going to use it to my advantage, and it will speed up the dry time with my milk paint, and it'll create a really cool crackle effect. Now, I understand that you guys might be working, inside your home, or when you watch this, it might be a different time of the year, and you can't work on your piece outside. I will also show you another technique to achieve the same finish without working outside and using the sun. But basically, this is what we are going to learn today. And you'll also notice that I have a stenciled pattern design on it. That is actually from the Miss Mustard Seeds milk paint collection. And the image on here was actually inspired by Marian, the creator, her actual brush strokes, because she painted this design by hand. So what they did was they created a stencil that imitated that look from the dresser she did. And I used her piece actually as inspiration, and I will show you that as well, but I'm just gonna put my own little twist on it. So let's go check out the process. So the product I'm going to be using today is Miss Mustard Seeds milk paint, and the color I'm using is mustard seed yellow. Now, I wanted this piece to have the chippy look, so I did not use the bonding agent. And what I find is when you do add the bonding agent, first of all, your paint is not going to get chippy and flaky, but it's also kind of a little bit harder to do the crackle effect, which I'm going to be showing you guys as well today. So to start it off, I like to make my paint first and then prep my piece. So what I did was I added 1 cup of warm water and then 1 cup of the milk paint powder. And then I just go ahead and I stir it. But what I want to show you guys is milk paint is a thinner consistency. So I've had customers, say to me their paint's not mixing up right, it's really watery. I want to show you guys this is the typical consistency. And if you want your paint to be a little bit more thick, you can go ahead and add a little bit more powder to it. But I want you to know that milk paint is different than traditional furniture paints in the fact that it is a thinner consistency. So I like to make my paint ahead of time, and then it gives it time to rest when I go ahead and prep my furniture piece. So I like to let the milk paint sit for at least 15 minutes. This way, the actual minerals get a chance to dissolve so that the limestone can dissolve. Otherwise, you're gonna notice like some white bumps and gritty texture on your piece. And what that is it's milk paint that has not yet dissolved from the water. So letting it rest is an important step. Okay, so now that we have our milk paint all mixed up and it's resting, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna prep our piece. Now, when you want to do the chippy finish, sometimes having a little bit of dirt or grime might actually work to your benefit because it's going to act as a resist. So if there were oils like old furniture polish and stuff on this, that is going to make my milk paint repel the surface. But I always still want to clean my surface, and I like to use Fusion's TSP, and I mix it with a bottle of water. It's actually like 1 little capful because it's a concentrated blend to a full liter of water. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray down my piece. And I'm just going to do this top portion with you guys so you guys can get an idea. And then I like to use lint-free blue shop towels whenever I'm working on something. And this piece didn't look super dirty, but you can tell there's definitely some dirt and grime on it. And now this part I would say is optional. The more surface tooth I create by sanding, the more my paint is going to adhere to the surface. Now, I really don't want it to adhere a ton, because I want it to be chippy. So I could go ahead and just skip this step altogether. I do have a 220 sandpaper on it. But if I just do like a little tiny scratch up of the surface, I don't think it's gonna make a huge impact. So I just am going to show you guys. So if you're painting like a regular piece of furniture, usually with your prep, you would clean first, then you do a light scuff sand. So when I say that, I just mean going with the grain and scratching up the surface. And you can see, hopefully you guys can see that. But like I said, I want this to be really chippy, so I'm gonna kind of skip the sanding part. And then whenever you do like a light scuff sand, you also want to go ahead and remove any of the sanding dust that you create. Now, because I'm working outside and it's super hot, I'm guessing it's about 80 degrees out here today, everything's gonna dry incredibly fast. Typically when I'm prepping furniture, after I clean with TSP, I allow it to dry for at least about 15 minutes, just because I wanna make sure that the water has had an opportunity to evaporate. In this case, I didn't really, spray it super heavily, so you can see it's already dry to the touch. So I'm gonna go ahead with my paint. And now after it has rested, it's really important that you always have something on hand to continuously stir it while you're working. Because what's gonna happen is the milk paint, the minerals are gonna start to settle towards the bottom of your cup. And then sometimes you can have just some unevenness with the color. You might see some streaking too. So it's always important to stir it up and also to re-stir while you're painting. And I'm gonna go ahead now and give you guys a close-up look as I apply the paint. So we're gonna work on this top portion, and whenever I'm painting a piece of furniture, I always like to work at the top, start at the top and work my way down. This allows gravity to work with me and not against me. So for example, if I started on the bottom and I got the bottom all done and then I move to the top, and let's say I get a drip, I'm gonna drip my paint on my already finished surface. So in this case, if you start at the top and you work your way down, if you have any drips or anything, they're gonna go onto the surface that has not yet been painted, therefore not messing up your finish. So that's just a helpful hint. I'm also going to be using this brush today. This is the Stahlmeister. It's from the 1 series. I don't know if you guys can see no, you can't see it really well, but I will put a link to this as well. I just like using round brushes when I'm working with milk paint because it's such a thinner paint. So I just want to show you guys what it looks like. A cool thing about milk paint is you can continuously paint over it even when it's wet. It doesn't pull up like a traditional furniture paint would, because a lot of times when you're working with a traditional furniture paint, if you go over an area that's not yet dry, it will tend to want to pull the paint right off the piece. With milk paint, it works just a little bit differently, so you can go over areas that are still wet, and it's a really great way to achieve your coverage in a fast, quick amount of time. So what I like to do is I like to, when I'm going for the chippy look, I try to get the coverage I want right away before the paint really starts to dry and flake off. So I'm gonna try to build up the layers fast. And because I'm working outside in this hot heat, it's gonna dry incredibly fast. Like this is already almost dry to the touch. So I just want to show you guys how I build up the layers. So I'm going over it, and obviously it's not completely dry. Because what I see happen is some people will paint like a buffet, for example, and it takes you quite some time to make it all the way around the buffet. And by the time you get that first layer on, and you get, to go ahead and apply your second layer, it might already start chipping. And then if you want to touch up some areas and add more coverage, it's like you're painting over then the raw wood where it chipped, and you're not getting that depth of coverage you want. So this is kind of a helpful hint to build up your layers of coverage fast if you're going for that chippy look. I also like to warn my customers that the first coat of milk paint is not the most attractive. because it's kind of a thinner paint, it looks, you know, like it doesn't have great coverage at all. But the magic starts to happen when you go ahead and put on your second coat. Because yeah, right now this is looking a little scary. But trust me, it'll look better. I'll try to stay up here where you guys can see it. Like right here, it's already, you know, if I push hard, you're gonna see my fingerprints. But if I tap gently, it's, you know, it's drying incredibly fast. So I just wanna build up the coverage before the crackling starts to happen. And there's lots of ways to achieve, you know, crackling. I could lay down, like use a resist, such as the wax puck, or even like furniture wax or beeswax. But in this case, I am just using the milk paint straight with no bonding agent and no resists. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead, allow this to dry, and then show you guys what it looks like after my next coat, just so that it saves you guys some time. And it doesn't, you don't have to watch all these steps that take forever. But I'll tell you guys about how long it takes for this to dry completely to the touch. So stay tuned. So it's been about 2 minutes. And now it is completely dry to the touch because it's so hot out here. So I'm gonna go ahead and re-stir my milk paint, just reincorporate it a little bit. And I'm gonna continue to build up coverage. Now I'm using, I would say a lighter color. I think yellow would fall in the category of like a light color over a really dark color. So know that when you're using, you know, lighter colors going over dark, you're gonna, you know, need more than, you know, 1 to 2 coats for coverage. I always like to tell people when you're using those brighter colors, especially the whites, you know, you can expect, depending on how heavy as well you know, you put down your layers, but expect, you know, 3 to 4 coats for like solid, opaque coverage. Because it is such, you know, a thin paint. But I just think milk paint's awesome. It can really create a finish that I just think you can't imitate with using other traditional furniture paints. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you. I hope you guys can see this, but it's already starting to crackle because it's drying so incredibly fast. So what I meant by applying your layers to get that coverage, that solid opaque coverage fast, is because now when this, you know, completely is dry and all the water has evaporated out and it crackles, I like the coverage that's around this area. But if you look up here, for example, this still does not have solid opaque coverage. I can still see, you know, some of the original finish. So before it gets completely dry, I want to keep adding layers of paint to build that up so that it's, you know, solid like this. Okay, so now what I want to show you guys is I have the solid opaque coverage and my milk paint is still drying, but I am still out in this hot heat. So what it allowed the paint to do was dry a lot faster than if I was working indoors right now. And by it drying so fast, I was able to, you know, layer on my paint very quickly. Like this entire side, and this thing is, you know, it's over 6 feet tall. And I just did this side. but I would say I probably, you know, spent about 15 minutes total on this side, and it looks right now like it is dry. But just know with any paint, it always dries from the surface and, you know, goes down. So right now, even though it is dry to the touch, it's still not thoroughly dry. So before you know, you can see that I'm starting to get some, you can tell it's really awesome, some cool crackle and chipping. Oh great, now that the sun's going down, you can really tell. But what I like to tell all my customers is allow your piece to completely dry for at least 24 hours. After 24 hours, it is completely, so I always just wait till the next day. If you're in a super rush, I guess you could, you know, bump that up, but I like to just wait overnight, because by the time, you know, 24 hours has happened, 100% of all the water is completely evaporated out of the paint, and then the paint is just sticking to our surface. So whatever's gonna chip, you'll know at that point. And that's when I like to come in and rub, you know, all these little areas that are crackled and chippy. I like to remove that. And then if I don't get the desired amount of chipping, I can go ahead and use frog tape, or I like to use a scraper too, and force some of the chipping. But this just shows you guys how working outside in direct sunlight with a high heat will really speed up the process. And also, it's, in my opinion, if you don't use the bonding agent, it's almost like a guaranteed way to get some crackle and some chipping. Okay, check it out. I'm just using my finger. If I wanted to be more aggressive, I could use a scraper. I like to use Venetian plaster scrapers, but like any type of paint scraper would work great. Okay guys, here's another tip. So you can see this paint that has chipped away, I had just used my finger and I'm gently going over it. But with milk paint, it will have a little bit of a texture to it once it's completely dry. So what I like to do, and you can do this also between layers of your paint, is I like to give it a light sand. So when I'm all said and done, I like to go over it, and the more I sand, the more pressure I put on it, the more paint is most likely gonna flake off, since that bonding agent wasn't used. But by sanding this, then it's gonna have a nice smooth to the touch texture. And then just like any of your furniture pieces, if you want to distress it, now would be the time that you'd do that as well. So you could just apply more pressure. You could do like a wet sand, or in this case, I'm just using a 220 fine grit sanding sponge. And then you can take like a tack cloth and just wipe away your dust. But basically that would be how you would remove any of the excess chipping paint. So like right now, the paint that's on here, it's not gonna flake off anymore. It's already dried overnight, and it's been about, you know, close to 24 hours. And so it's not gonna flake off anymore. And now I also just lightly smooth out the surface so that when I rub my hand on it, it has just a nice soft touch. Okay, so I want to show you guys a cool trick. I'm working with Miss Mustard Seed's milk paint, and I'm using mustard seed yellow. And on this drawer front, I have the first coat of paint down. And you can see it looks a little bit scary. It's not, you know, super great coverage on the first coat. But what I want to show you guys is I'm going to, for my second coat, apply it really heavy. And then I'm using a blow dryer and hitting it with some high heat while the paint is still really wet. And what it does is it creates this cool crackle effect. So let me show you guys what I mean. I'm using just a pointed Stahlmeister brush, and milk paint is a thinner paint. So let me just show you guys. So it's kind of, you know, it looks watery when I'm putting it down, and I'm putting it down a little bit heavy. And then I'm gonna take my blow dryer and put it on high heat, and I'm gonna have the heat close to it while it's still really wet. And now you can see by doing that, it forces it to crackle. And I'm gonna just now let it dry naturally, and it might start to chip off a little bit more because I have not added the bonding agent. But I just wanna show you guys that this is a cool trick you can do when working with milk paint. Now it's time for that amazing hand-painted looking design. So for the stencil, I'm using the Miss Mustard Seeds Elizabeth stencil. That is this design. And so this stencil is reusable. It's made out of a nice thick material so you can clean it after each use and you'll have tons of use out of it. And then I'm using Farmhouse White. And what I did was I mixed it the same way as I mixed the mustard seed yellow, where I did, you know, the 1-to-1, 1 part water to 1 part of the paint. But then I wanted to make it a little bit more thick because when I'm doing a stencil, you know, I want to avoid having the paint seep under. So I just added a little bit more powder. So the ratio is a little bit different. And you can tell the texture is just a little bit more creamy versus if you look at this one, it's just a little bit thinner. I don't know if you guys can tell that, but this one is just, you know, it's a thinner texture consistency versus a more creamy consistency. But then the secret weapon I like to use when I'm stenciling is actually cosmetic makeup sponges. So I will show you how I use them to stencil. Okay, so now I'm going to show you guys how I created this cool, it looks like hand-painted design, but it's actually a stencil. Now, because I'm going to be working and, you know, I'm going to show you guys on this side over here, and I'm just going to put a little bit of this design on here. But one tip I can say is whenever you're stenciling with milk paint, because it's a thinner paint, if you can tip your, you know, piece of furniture like on its side, so this way when I'm stenciling, my stencil paint is going to want to, like, you know, with gravity go down. But if I take this big piece and I flip it on its side, then it's going to function like a flat surface, like a tabletop. And this way it will help prevent the paint from leaking underneath a stencil. That's one tip, and I'm going to show you guys another one. This is exactly what I'm talking about. By having it laying on its side, I am able to work up here and put a stencil design on it, and then gravity is going to work with me instead of against me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my stencil up here at the top, and I'm actually going to make this design, you know, start at the top and then it's going to wrap down the back. But whenever I'm doing a stencil, I always want to secure it in place. So I'm just using some painter's tape. This is actually the Frog Tape brand. You want to be careful that you don't push down super hard because the paint still is not sealed. That if I rip this off, I might take some of my paint with it. So if you're worried that you don't want to remove any more tape, just, you know, gently put down your painter's tape. So then I'm going to go ahead and stir up my Farmhouse White. So now with the stencil and milk paint, because it's such a thin paint, I like to apply it with, instead of using a stencil brush, I like to use makeup sponges. So I'm going to, let's see if you guys can see this. I'm going to get the makeup sponge. You know, I'm using an actual like stir stick because I'm going to take the sponge, and you can just, honestly, you could dip into your cup a little bit, but you don't want to get it super absorbed with paint. So what I do is I load it up first, and you can see I have it completely covered. But then if I went and started stenciling right down, there's so much paint on this that it's most likely going to seep under. So I'm going to just offload it a little bit. Like that. And then I can go ahead and I dab or pounce, whatever you want to call it. If a little bit were to go under, you know, I'm not too worried because I want this to have, you know, like an authentic hand-painted design, and it doesn't have to look perfect. And then I just keep repeating that process. So I like to, you know, use my little stick, get my thing full of paint again, offload it a little bit, and then continue to dab. Now, because this is a thinner paint, I'm probably going to go ahead and apply 2 layers of it. So before I move my stencil, I'm going to wait till my paint dries and put a second coat. Move it a little bit so you guys can see. And milk paint does dry incredibly fast, so this process won't take you forever. And I'm just gonna go back to the beginning, get a little bit darker coverage. And if you wanted to make it solid, you could just keep adding more and more layers. But I like how it looked on the drawer front where it was a little bit, you know, translucent where I could still see. It just made it look kind of old. And then let me show you guys. I don't have to wait till it dries completely. I can just go ahead, remove my tape, and then pick my stencil straight up. And there you go. Here is a better view of the pattern, and then I'm gonna just have it wrap along this whole backside. And then all you have to do is seal it. And in this case, it's not super duper chippy, so I'm not gonna use the tough coat. I'm just gonna actually use furniture wax, but you could use a hemp oil, furniture wax, or the tough coat if you decided to. So I hope this video helps you guys out and gives you some tips when working with milk paint.